So, welcome to Vantage Point Conversations, where I get to ask loads of questions that are maybe on my mind, get to speak to guests that I probably would never come into contact with in my day to day life. And today's guest is Edita. Edita, am I saying that correct? Yeah?
Yeah,
Bandur. Bandur. How am I doing?
very good. Very good. Excellent.
Nice, nice. My opening monologue is always the same. I never introduce my guests. I much prefer you to do it. And I've said this before. It's not because I'm lazy. I just don't think I would do the best job. So take as long as you want, as little time as you want, just to introduce yourself. Anything, highlights, lowlights, anything you think would be interesting for the audience to know about you, and then we just jump into our conversation.
Thank you, Colin. It's nice to be here in a different live stream. As you said, I'm Edita Bandur. I'm a business English teacher. I teach entrepreneurs and enterprises. So sometimes it's solopreneurs, sometimes it's teams in bigger companies. The connecting theme for all of those is trying to work on their confidence. That's a major pain point for all of my clients. And then accuracy as an add-on. This is why today's topic is a bit of a pushback to this idea that you need to speak perfectly to express yourself and to connect with people, because it is all about connection. English is a global language, and I feel quite privileged to be able to help people to connect with people from all over the world. And since I work online, it's really like there is no end to possibilities, and I try to make that clear to people and help them use at least some of these opportunities. I'm also a co-host of a live show, so that's something that we have in common and that we connected over. I like these because they're not scripted, because it's all very casual and we get to speak to our audiences. So I hope there will be somebody in the comments saying hi, because that's always interesting and something new to learn.
Nice, fantastic. So yeah, so most of these conversations are basically curiosity from my side, but I think they're very relevant. But from my perspective, like you said, we kind of bonded over. You run your own podcast as well, so we'll get into that. But from a basic perspective, why I'm very interested, I'm from the UK. I live in Luxembourg now, and when I came to Luxembourg, I tried to learn German, and I spent most. So I went to this. I paid for this school to learn German, and I put so much pressure on myself. It was ridiculous. And what happened is we went into this room, and because Luxembourg is very multicultural, I think there was about 12 of us in a room, and I would say all 11 participants spoke at least two languages, and it was only me that just spoke English. And I was trying to learn German, and the teacher came in and she spoke only in German. So she didn't explain anything in English. And I really struggled with it. But um, one of the well, two of these reasons that I think is because I was taught English a long time ago. So I guess I was 5 or 6 when you start to learn how it's all put together, and then you don't really think about it. You just talk, and people will correct you maybe when you're doing something through school, etc. But I can't really understand. I can't explain to anyone how the English language is. If someone says, "Oh, okay, I say this," and I would correct them, I couldn't actually go back to the rules behind it and sort of justify it. But the second thing that happened to me was I was hugely embarrassed to get things wrong, and so much so that I remember making this joke. Just so basically, we were talking about families, and I said that my grandparents were dead, um, uh, just so that it would get a laugh, and then it would take the focus off of me. And I realized that I was in all of that. I was not learning anything. I was really insecure, embarrassed about getting things wrong, and my focus was moving on to the next person. And there was no enjoyment in it. There was no pleasure. It felt almost like punishment. And so it kind of gave me a bit of a, not a trauma, I wouldn't say, but just this thing of, oh, okay, I kind of want to get away from that. And I think the lessons were like 2 hours, and it just it felt like 4 hours, and it was really painful. Um, but in Luxembourg, everyone sort of speaks different languages. I have two young children. They just soak it up like a sponge. They speak Luxembourgish, which is actually a language. So it sounds like I've made it up, but it's not. They speak German because of their mum. They speak English because of me. They're in the playground, so they understand a little bit of French, etc. And so, and as an English person, I think so. I never thought about it until you go to another country. But when you realise that there is a world outside of the UK, you realise, oh, it is beneficial to speak another language. And in schools, we were taught French. That kind of, I think that's the first language, and then maybe later on there's a second language, which we had the option to do German or Spanish. And I, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to get your perspective. I know I'm doing a lot of talking my side, but um, I think if you asked most English people, what would they like to do? I think one is play a musical instrument, and the second would be to learn another language. However, it's quite rare that an English person does learn another language because I don't know. Uh, People say it's an arrogance, and I'm not sure it's an arrogance. I'm not sure. And again, it'd be really interesting to understand your perspective. Um, but I think it's maybe if everyone's embarrassed and they want to get things perfect, and that's pretty much the topic of our conversation today. Um, and so we don't do it. And then when we go on holiday, we learn, just to say please and thank you. And for those week or 2 weeks, we're like, yeah, we're really pleased that we've said thank you for whatever's being given to us or served to us. And then we go home and we never do it again. And I think not most of the world, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of people adopt the English language, and it's easier to convey and get across what you need in English, even if it's not quite right from the other person's perspective. The conversation flows a lot easier because they would maybe understand a bit more than you would in trying to translate it. So if I say you don't know anything in Spanish, but they understand a bit more in English, maybe not perfect, but you get the result quicker, so that people will adopt themselves to speaking English, if that makes sense. So I've said a lot. Feel free to unpack. We can jump off any of that. Your thoughts, feelings, anything that you think, you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's quite a few things that you said there. Obviously, the most important reason I would say people from the UK don't learn additional languages, not all of them, but a lot of them, is their lack of motivation. As you said, the goal of language is communication. It's getting your message across, it's getting to that connection. And if other people adapt to you and accommodate you all the time, then you're less inclined to go through that embarrassing, difficult process. And learning a second language and expressing yourself in a second, third, fourth language, unless you're a child and all of those filters are lowered and it's much more natural and you're growing along with the language and it's very natural for you to make mistakes. The older we are, the more embarrassed we are about mistakes, and it's inevitable. It's a stage that, well, one never ends because we all make mistakes in all of our languages, because language learning never ends, and there are different vocabularies and different registers, different contexts where we are all kind of lost, of course, And plus, we learn to be experts in something, we learn to be composed, we get used to being understood, and then losing that is a huge space of the unknown. And we are all afraid of that, and we don't like to be misunderstood. We don't like to be taken less seriously than we're used to, and we get into our heads, and then that embarrassment grows. And what you showed and talked about with the German language example. I see that with my students all the time. And it is a trauma. And it is something that we bring from the school setting quite a lot, because these are very imperfect. The systems that we come from are based on the middle ground, whatever can make the biggest number of people happy, certain ideas that our governments might have about the level that we need to reach, checking certain boxes instead of a personalized and a more sensitive approach, which is understandable. People don't have the time and resources. So when we get to a point where we really need it, when we want to expand our businesses, for example, for my context, for business English, it's quite important. We've gone through all of these stages of embarrassment. We have this trauma, and it can be quite difficult to see that there's an alternative. And this is where us as teachers, as trainers, as coaches, have to find a way to make people comfortable and to have them have fun with the language. And being multilingual helps. As you said, your teacher spoke exclusively German. She didn't try to help you a bit, nudge you with English. I do use a bit of Croatian or Spanish or other languages as a resource in my classroom. When you get to a certain level, like intermediate and higher, then it's not that necessary. We might think about the different logic of our language and use that as a resource, but not necessarily the language itself in the classroom. But for complete beginners, of course, it lowers the tension. It makes it easier for people to get into the language, and it gives them that space to be experts. I like my students to explain their first language to me sometimes, because then they see, okay, maybe you're not an expert in English, but you're an expert in your own language, right? So there is a level of equality there, and they understand this perspective that we all have to start from somewhere, and that being multilingual is a resource, and that it makes it gives them an advantage that a lot of people don't have. Like you said, you don't, right? You are monolingual, and it's something that people need to be reminded of sometimes, because when they speak to native speakers of English, they can feel insecure, right? So I remind them, try to speak to them in French that they also suffered through in their classrooms, and see how they feel the same way that you do. So that's something that it seems obvious. It should be obvious, but it isn't, because we all think about ourselves a bit too much, which is, it's a normal human thing, but we forget that the point of the conversation is to connect with the other person and to be understood and to create a relationship. And it's not that much about how correct we are, how many words we know, and so forth.
Yeah, it's there's so many points that I kind of want to touch on there, because it's super interesting. Ages ago, I did so in Luxembourg, I worked for, when I first came here, I worked for a bank, and they were offering a public speaking, like I think it was even half a day training, and I was like, okay, I want to do this, and I don't know why I actually wanted to do it, but yeah, it just felt good. There was no purpose for me, that I wasn't in a position where I needed to go and speak in front of people. But what was interesting was, so I think I was the only native English speaker, and the training was all in English. Otherwise, I wouldn't have attended, to be honest. But it was run by an English guy. I think he spoke a few different languages, but everything was done in English. And one of the arguments from the other people in that training session was, it's easier for you, like for me, because you speak English. And it was really interesting, because the argument against that, this other guy said, yeah, but actually it's better that you don't, because English people tend to use language and overcomplicate it, and use more, if I say sophisticated language, I think sometimes we try to pretend that we're smarter than we are, because we use long words that like try to baffle the audience so we feel superior or smarter. And he said, what you're actually trying to do when you're doing public speaking is connect with people. So you don't need all these fancy words. You don't need to know all of this stuff. The basic premise of what you're trying to say, these are straightforward words and sentences. It's not overly complicated. And what happened when he said that, it kind of gave everyone permission. And again, I think we put excuses, I've already given you some of mine in that German session, but it sort of allowed to take the pressure off, and people then started talking. And so I don't know, let's say there was 6 of us doing this training. And the more that they practiced, the more that they realized. And I think they looked at me because I was English that I was going to correct them or something, but I didn't. And I've been in the UK, I've been in, we used to call them like town halls. I used to work in banks, and you'd get these guys, sort of C-suite executives just yabbing on. And they would like come out with terms that you have no idea what they're talking about. And so let's say there's 200 people in a room, there's one guy at the front and he's lost everybody, or maybe he's speaking to about 3 people that understand those terms, and he's not smart enough to look into the audience and go, I need to use basic language. That for me is the failing, really, because again, you're there to convey something, to make it as simple and not make it complex. So it's actually, it switches the other way around. And I think if people can lower their the pressure that they're putting on themselves and have this expectation that, okay, I've got to use all these complex terms, and you can just, if you can convey what the message that you are in the simplest terms, I think that's actually the goal. Have you seen that from your training?
Yeah, absolutely. A good speaker is one that is understood by the most number of people, one that conveys their message successfully, not one that can, pack it into a beautiful bow that people don't understand or feel intimidated by, which can be quite an issue, especially if you want to connect with people. Perfection and polish belongs to certain contexts, okay, but in most contexts, it is a bit of a wall between you and the audience, because there's nothing to relate to. And if there's nothing to relate to, people disconnect. So there's that. And when it comes to being multilingual, I think there's more of awareness that we all speak different languages, not just language-based, but also vocabulary, industry, context-based. So if you are speaking to a non-expert audience, you need to adapt to that. And we all forget about that because it comes very natural to us that we know something. So we assume that the other person knows the same thing. So we use terms that we don't share. And again, this disconnect happens. So being forced to simplify because it's your second, third, fourth language can be a huge advantage in a way.
Yeah. And that's such a huge benefit if people understood that message, like, and then they go, oh, okay, I'm taking some pressure off. And that kind of leads into my thought about confidence, because perfectionism, confidence, they're not the same thing, but I think they're quite linked in a way. And we have this, I don't know, misunderstanding about confidence, that you're going to do one act and then you're, whatever it is, and then so you think that you're not confident, and so you can do one thing and then you become confident. That doesn't happen like that. It doesn't, you don't change into like a superhero overnight. It's not that way. And I found this for myself. The confidence comes from the little things that you can repeat and you can do. And again, I haven't done that in terms of a language setting, but over time, you just try, experiment, and the more confidence you have, kind of, it's like this little compounding thing. And at certain points, you forget where you were, and you just go, yeah, okay, I'm okay to speak like on lives or whatever. But it takes time, and if you do it small enough, it doesn't seem that scary. It's just a little bit, and if you can work on that, then yeah, you find after a very short period of time that you're this more confident person. Doesn't mean that you're egocentric. It doesn't mean that you can just go and stand in front of 2,000 people speak. But that's not what most people actually face on a day-to-day basis. And I found that doing that, and I think people think that the confidence has to show up before you do something. I think you have to show up for the confidence to show up, and that's how I've seen it. And I think people get it around the wrong way. Do you experience the same? You've seen that a lot?
Absolutely. My experience in the classroom, we can go back to your experience that you mentioned, is that you need to have the little wins to get to the big ones for you. This is all relative, but if your goal is to communicate something to a client so that they have that, oh, wow moment, then you start by communicating something less relevant with fewer risks in a classroom, for instance. So it might be explaining your favorite dish in English. That's a really popular one because we are all experts on these things that we have experienced a million times and tried and cooked, prepared, and whatever. So when my students have that moment where they've managed to explain something that's actually quite complex, just because it's not about nuclear physics, it doesn't mean that it's not something that has a lot of ingredients and a lot of nuance tied to it. So when they manage to do that and somebody says, oh, wow, okay, I never thought about it that way. Oh, maybe I'll prepare it. Or that's what my grandma did. So you get this relationship building and you get this moment of realization that you can do that and that it's the same principle. And then with time, you stop being aware of the fact that there's a connection and you just start doing it. It becomes more natural. And I think when we talk about confidence, people often assume, for some reason, even though it doesn't match their experience normally, that confidence means that you're not afraid, that you're completely void of all anxieties. And that's not what confidence is. Confidence is just knowing that there's hope in that situation, and that even though you're afraid, this fear is not so great that it paralyzes you and stops you from doing the thing, because you've collected so many of these small wins and smaller experiences that confirmed that you can do it, that nothing so bad is going to happen that you will regret it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because I think we'll talk about podcasting in a bit, but I'll just sort of reference it now. I sometimes just before going live, I'll go, oh, I feel a little bit underprepared, or like this voice in my head says, oh, you're not quite ready, or whatever, and then I go, no, you can do this, Colin. So I've done 60 plus episodes, and you go and you've got that evidence in your brain. So the bit that's trying to sabotage you, and you go, no, I've got 60 of these done. You know that you can do it. And it's having those references in your brain, almost this library to sort of say no. And that took 60 episodes. Well, actually, it came before then, but you go, and the reason being is that you would say, well, if I've done 60 of these, then I never worry about it. I just show up and I don't care. That's absolutely not the case. Like some days, something, you can just wake up in an odd mood, for no reason. You had a funny dream, or just you didn't get enough sleep, or anything. Like I've got 2 young kids that can derail your morning, and you can be in a different state. And so then when you show up, you feel that you're maybe not in the right place to do it, but you go, no, I rely on those references to say, yes, I can do it. And why I like these conversations, and you mentioned it earlier, they're unscripted, and I don't have to look at something, go, oh, if I ask this question, it's about exploring. And I think most of the time we can have conversations, we can do that with someone a friend that we meet. And that's why I do what I do, is just there's no gotcha moments. There's no, I don't want to go viral. I'm not trying to, get this viral moment from my guests. It's just having this conversation to explore stuff. And at the heart of who I am, I'm curious. And so just lean into that. Okay, if there's a question, ask a question. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And so when I do get that overwhelm, I just go, yeah, just, you've got the evidence, you just show up as you and things will flow. I can't find a time in my brain where that hasn't worked. So yeah, and it's good to have that reference.
Absolutely. But it's something, as you said, that we need to remind ourselves of, even though we all have these experiences with, I don't know, riding a bike, learning any skill, doing anything for the first time. There was always a first time where you had to gather that strength from something. So it's just making ourselves aware of this, reminding ourselves of this, and using opportunities in a group setting. For me, that's quite important for confidence building. I think when we're working on accuracy and preparing for something specific, one-on-ones can be very beneficial. But when it's about confidence, having a group of people who are going through a similar thing, who understand your fears, and who are there to support you and to be vulnerable in front of you and make these mistakes and stumble and do it all over again, this can really help us. And I think lives are very similar, right? We're here with our audience who are quite quiet at the moment, but they're involved in this process. They're here with us in some way. And I think, they can think of their own situations where it was something new, it was something difficult, but they managed to do it. And perhaps it was the mistakes and the hiccups that were the most relevant in these situations, because this is where you learn the fastest. Everyone is aware of this, even though it's so uncomfortable to go through it and think about it. We would all love to read a book on something, internalize it completely, and then just do things perfectly, but that would make us robots. And now with the AI surge, I think we are more and more convinced that even robots can't do that perfectly. Yeah. And it wouldn't be interesting. There would be no fun in it, because part of the human experience is exploration and stumbling and falling and then realizing, oh wow, now I can do it better, because that moment is not so exciting or rewarding if you don't have that process of stumbling and falling and experimenting. And it's not just about learning how to do something differently and understanding, oh, I made a mistake, I should do the opposite. It's also discovering that sometimes what we've seen as a mistake is actually a new way of doing things, or a new approach, or something that gives us a result that we never even hoped for. And I love language learning and teaching because it works that way internally. There is no other way to get there. There is no one who was just quiet for 20 years and then just started speaking perfectly. It just doesn't work. So you have to go through this process. And the more you think about it, I think the more lessons you can take for other things from it, including streaming and podcasting.
So I'm going to carry on that thought in a second, but you mentioned about our audience. So there is a comment. I will bring it up on. So the Dinka, do you know Dinka? Is she?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Dinka, if you're still watching, thank you very much for your comment. I don't always put the comments up here because I've started to see that I get some trolls on the comments, and some of the things that people put up there is not readable during the podcast. But so I have to kind of filter. But Dinka, thank you very much. So I kind of want to switch to you've mentioned it a few times about enjoyment and pleasure, and so my relationship with learning a language has been, let's say, traumatic in a way, but I need to find a way to enjoy it and to feel, I want to say, safe to experiment, etc. And so I have a French girlfriend, and she speaks amazing English, I'd say perfectly. But when I go and see her family, they pretty much all speak French and don't speak that much English. I realised that so we'd gone out for a drink, not too much, maybe 1 or 2 drinks, and then I went to see her family, and it took the edge on. And I'm not suggesting this is what people should do, because reliance on alcohol is a confidence boost. But what happened? It basically took down the first part of my brain, this barrier that I had, and I started experimenting, and it almost allowed me to go, yeah, but I know that word. Yeah, I know that word. And then I sort of strung it all together, and I was like, why do I need alcohol to feel that that's okay to talk? And again, there was no perfect sentence that I made. Like, it just was not that way. But I conveyed what I needed to in that moment, and they understood. It may not be, again, perfect, but they got the context of what I was talking about. They didn't obviously know that I'd had maybe a few drinks before. But I was like, wow, it's almost this subconscious part that I would not reach into, or this place of safety where I couldn't get past when I hadn't had a drink, but that alcohol had allowed me to just feel a bit more, I don't know, trusting, or just bring that barrier down. And it was very interesting. And the strange thing was, when I actually spoke and I found that I could reference these things, it was really enjoyable. Whereas normally I think it's quite painful. So I was wondering if, in your experience, is there, do we all have a different way of learning? Do we have a different way of, when it comes to language, do we have different references? Because you talked about joy, you talked about different students. What's your experience? Did you have different approaches? Yeah, in any of that, does that make sense? And how do you work on it with your students?
Well, this question of alcohol comes up much more frequently.
Oh, really? Okay, nice.
You'd think.
I'm not on my hand. Okay.
I get that from a lot of my students. Like, "Oh, I had a beer once when I was speaking English to this person, and it actually helped." So I even had an idea of this project of like wine and English, like you have painting and wine. I think that's becoming a new trend.
Oh, nice.
But what I tried to do instead of making people reliant on alcohol, is to create a safe atmosphere in the classroom. And people are more alike than they are different. When it comes to different learning styles and approaches, there are differences in how people process information. Some people need a bit more time. Some people prefer to have a task and do something where they see immediate results and so forth. But generally speaking, you have to meet the person where they are when it comes to their anxiety. And this is where people are quite similar, but there are levels. There are levels of bad experiences that they've had in the past. There's a level of perfectionism and the need for control. So dependent on that, we will need more or less time to build that safety. But the safety is built in a similar way for everyone. It's giving them these little opportunities to be successful in their communication. It's pushing them, but not in a way that they start from very complex task. You start from where they know they will do a good job. And this is different depending on the level. I always have some preparation before I even start speaking to my students. I tend to collect some information. So with experience, you kind of know where to start and how to get them to say something and make them feel comfortable. And it's mostly speaking about themselves and the things that they love and the people that they love and the things that they love doing. Because one, everyone loves speaking about themselves. It's very human. It's very natural. It's very familiar. And two, this is where you have your expert knowledge. So it might be your favorite meal. It might be your favorite song. It might be speaking about your children. It might be speaking about your job in business English. This is it. This is the big one. English is a global language. So what happens a lot, even with complete beginners, and I don't have a lot of complete beginners as students, so I love them because it's a rare opportunity to have that added challenge. But what you'll see is people will say they are A0, A1, no previous knowledge. But the fact is, they've been exposed to English their whole life, most of the time. They'll know at least those words that are connected to their work. They read something somewhere where people use the English word for that tool or for that method or whatever it is. So this is where we'll zoom in. Okay. Oh, it seems that you know something, actually. Could you tell me more about it? Could you teach me about this? And if they're able to teach me something, that means that the knowledge is actually quite high. Because to be able to teach someone, you have to, one, be able to simplify, which is difficult for a lot of people. And we talked about that already. So just having a few basic words and sentences is enough there to get to the core of things. And this is what's important, actually. And when I get that aha moment and they see, oh, they've connected with me, then that feeds their curiosity and it lowers this anxiety. And what I love hearing at the end of the session is, oh, the time just flew by. Oh, was it really an hour already? When you said 2 hours, 2 hours, that's difficult. That's a challenge. I think it's not easy. But then you have to do it even more. You have to make everyone feel included and respected. And you have to make them aware that they do come with a lot of knowledge. And these gaps that they have, I'm here to help with that. That's not really your responsibility. So once they let that go, things become much easier. Without beer. The beer can come later.
Yeah. And maybe it's a celebration that you've done it, not during the lesson itself. So I on this subject of learning, so actually the guy who was doing this public speaking course, I don't know how we got into the subject, but he said, because I think I'd explained that I hadn't sort of landed with the learning German language, and he said that there was a guy called Michel Thomas. Do you know Michel Thomas? You heard of?
I'm not familiar.
So he was, I don't know where he was from, but he basically spoke, I don't know, some ridiculous amount, like 20 different languages. And he basically did all these courses, and I think it was a long time ago. So he used to do them on audio cassettes and people could learn. And so I actually started doing this. And so I switched to trying to learn French a few years ago because I wondered if it was speaking German was the challenge. What was it for me? Was it the words, the structure of sentences, or something just didn't quite land with me? So I tried to switch to French. And the brilliant part about what he does, I think he said English language was derived from French language. I think that's how it was done. And I don't understand all the background of how language, moved across all the countries, etc. But he said something like 80 or 90% of all the verbs in English came from French, and you already know them. I heard that sentence and I went, oh, I've got this. Like, if I know English, then I probably know some French. So I wasn't starting from zero. And it gave me this confidence that's just like, that's not, I don't feel like I'm a baby and just like trying to understand ABC. I was like, oh, I come from a place where I might know something. Excuse me. And that gave me this curiosity to kind of go, oh yeah, I can understand that. And the way he did it was not very, it was quite structured, and you didn't have to learn. And so he did it in a way that wasn't painful for me. I didn't keep it up. So I don't know why I didn't keep it up. I think I also am quite a visual learner, and so I do a lot of things with words and pictures, and that really resonates and that sinks in with me. So I wondered if, I know there's lots of apps and stuff like that, that you can do, but I think having that confidence, that base understanding that some stuff that you can pull already, that that you can attempt to try something, built that confidence. And it brings me on to this other point. So in Luxembourg, oftentimes I'll go into the city, and it's on me. I don't know any other language. I'm getting better. I can understand maybe German and French a little bit. I can understand context. I can't necessarily reply that well. But there's always this misunderstanding when you ask if someone speaks English and they say no. And you go, oh, okay. And then I'm a bit stuck because I don't have really much to sort of go on. I might try something. Then you actually find that the person, normally it's maybe in a restaurant or a shop or something like that, they're speaking amazing English. And you're like, you just said to me a second ago, you don't speak English. And I think this comes down to maybe two things. One, they just don't want to speak English because I think it's, well, no, you should learn my language, which is absolutely fine. But also, I think there's maybe this misunderstanding that I'm going to quote Shakespeare or something, or we're going to talk about something so complex that why you've said no is that you think that your level is not quite there. And it kind of ties into your point. And when I started around language, I realized, I don't know, I had this block in my head that when I was learning German, we're going to talk about stuff that I don't understand. But the subjects are the same. I'm talking about my day, my family, myself, the things around me. And I was like, yeah, why would that be different in any other language? You're talking about not basic stuff, but everyday things. And I know, yeah, it can be different when you're talking about business and, maybe, complex terms as part of your business. But again, it's just about, okay, I want to get here. And then I was like, well, just learn useful things like, where's the toilet? Or, thank you very much. And it doesn't have to be too much, and just go, oh yeah, I'm running late. Just useful things. And then because that brings it back to that enjoyable part, and you go, oh, okay, at least I got that. Whereas when I was in school, we were learning French at the time. If they'd explained to me, okay, this will be useful, and I understand you have to put the building blocks to understand why things are put together, etc. But if someone explained to me maybe in 40 years' time, you're going to move to a country where they predominantly speak French, you might want to know this. That would have been, I'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense for me. Whereas, again, I lived on my island and didn't think anything existed outside of that world. But you go, and if you can put it into some context of, okay, like, rather than, it felt like a punishment rather than an enjoyment and a pleasure to open it up. And every time I've spoken to someone who really enjoys language, the way that they talk about it, it's just like they open up the world, like, to so many possibilities, to understanding people, to connecting cultures, different food, like, and a lot of us love food and we love to understand, okay, the differences, the nuances and stuff like that. And I don't know why I'm thinking about Italy there, but I just think, someone,
because it's had food.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'm very hungry. But no, but Italians are obviously very passionate about their food as well. I'm sure they are in Croatia, but it just, like, to connect over something like food. And so when I speak to someone who loves language, it's like they're opening up the world, and it's just this huge pleasure. And so it goes from this, there's no trauma, there's no painful thing. It's almost this beautiful thing that you just go, I get to experience a whole new world. And I think if you could put that in context for people, that might help people realize the joy of doing that. And they're not an incentive, but okay, what that could actually lead to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a bit more difficult for you as an English speaker to think of it that way, because the world opens to you. It's a bit of a privilege, but also a disadvantage in these situations because it messes your motivation. most of my students will have this pretty strong motivation to learn English because they're aware this is the global language that opens up global possibilities. And that's really powerful. It doesn't just open possibilities in one country, it opens up the whole world to you. And they know this. They know this from a very early age, because English has been a lingua franca, ironically, for a very long time. It replaced Esperanto, which was supposed to be the lingua franca. And it just became a fact of life. I know for myself, I started learning English because I wanted to understand some music lyrics that sounded interesting to me, and I couldn't process it. You know, it sounded very nice, like the language sounded different, and I wanted this to open up for me. Movies, then, you know, all kinds of culture that we are exposed to that is created primarily in English, at least for our part of the world. Spanish speakers and Chinese speakers might be in a similar position because a big portion of the world understands them, but English is in a very specific place right now in our culture. So this is the big difference, I'd say.
Yeah. As were talking there, I started to think about your podcast because you know, a lot of your students are entrepreneurs, and ultimately entrepreneurs are trying to build something. You know, I don't want to say sell something, but yes, ultimately whatever they're building, they're wanting to try and sell. And you know, opening up your product, service, or whatever it is, not just, you know, let's just say from Croatia to the rest of the world, you've basically got such a bigger market. It's almost incomprehensible in terms of, okay, what that will do. And so then I was just thinking, because I know you invite guests onto your podcast, and then I was thinking the leap between learning a language and then going on a podcast that's live, and being able to speak with confidence. That's a big leap. Do you find people, is there a connection between it? Is the motivation behind it to, because they're entrepreneurs and they want to open up that world, or what is the motivation to do that, and to know that you're going to go into a live situation not knowing maybe all of the language and feeling okay with that? Is that like a mindset that you would attribute maybe to an entrepreneur, or like how do you see that?
For sure. Our podcast, I'm not the only host, I'm a co-host, which also makes it easier, just to mention that. But our podcast is called Seen and Heard. So the motivation is to be seen and heard. And entrepreneurs understand how important that is. Because you talk about sales, sales are kind of the final step. First, you need to build awareness of the fact that you exist, of where your place is within the business world, then to make people closer to you and consider you as a partner, as opportunity, as a resource, and then, you know, come the sales. And entrepreneurs know this. They know this in their first language, and they know that the amount of importance it has in their first language is very tiny compared to the importance it has in a global language, because obviously it opens up just so many more doors. And sometimes it works in the opposite direction as well, because they don't aim at the global audience. It's a way to practice, because they know, you know, there'll be fewer eyes that are really relevant to them. So it's like a practice ground. So sometimes the motivation comes from an opposite direction as well. But yeah, entrepreneurs, as we said, you have to have those small victories and those small struggles first. And they've mostly gone through a lot of that. You have to be courageous to start something of your own. You have to make mistakes. You have to go through those painful conversations to realize who is not your ideal audience, to realize who you maybe don't want to work with, in order to understand who you do want to work with and what you enjoy. So this helps a lot to even consider this possibility of speaking in a different language.
Yeah, it's so I've had quite a few guests on from that are not native English speakers. Not all of them are concerned about being on a podcast, but there were a few over this period of time, and I think part of it was being visible. Um, Part of it was a concern about not coming across or knowing all the right words or terms. And I think this sort of held them back. You could feel that they wanted to do it, but they felt that they maybe wouldn't show up or people wouldn't understand them. And it, I keep explaining to people, especially like if they have an accent, from my perspective as an English person, when anyone shows up with an accent from another country speaking English, and maybe there's a little bit that's not quite grammatically correct, or the tense is slightly out, I actually love it. And so they're thinking that's holding them back, but I find it more engaging, not from oh, this is a hard work, I've really got to concentrate, but it does this thing in my brain. I'm like, oh, I mean, even when you speak, there is a slight accent. I'm like, oh, that, and I always use the word exotic because I think it's just quite a nice way, because we always think that we're quite boring or very vanilla. And so when you show up as an exotic person, people pay attention just a bit more. And where we think that, you haven't got the tense right or something like that, people might go, oh yeah, but I not understand what they mean. They're not actually that critical about it, unless you have, a very strict person who is, absolutely, it must be said this way. Most people are very accepting of, these terms, and it actually is more engaging because, sometimes when you just hear, normal plain English, you go, oh, okay, fine. But then when you have to pay attention, it's much more interesting, and you actually take a lot more from it. So when I explain that to people who are maybe a bit nervous about being visible, and I don't know if they're using it as an excuse, and I'm not trying to judge that, I can actually challenge that and say, no, for me, it's much better that you do that, and people will resonate with it. So what seems to show up, we could, I want to define it as a weakness, and I don't like strengths and weaknesses necessarily, but it's actually something you can lean into. I'm not saying, pretend that you have an accent when you come on, but actually it's more engaging. And when people hear that, they're like, oh, okay. And it takes one less reason not to do it away. And I can guarantee every time those people have come on, they've had a great time and they've come across so well. There was a flowing conversation. It was brilliant. And I really love that, because that one thing about being visible kind of has gone away, and it gives them this confidence to reach into something, or it stops that old story, that old reason in their brain thinking they can't do this because of that. And I'm not trying to trick them. This is genuinely my opinion. And then they come alive, and I'm like, yes, now you can do this and you can do it. And I've seen these people go on to other people's podcasts and stuff like that, and you're like, brilliant. Like, that's no longer holding them back. And do you experience that from your guests? How does that show up, and especially from your perspective as well?
For sure. I get these comments and questions about accent a lot, and I think it's quite important to mention that everyone has an accent. And people forget that because they think of a generic or a certain hierarchy of accents as, no accent. That's not true. If somebody came to you from Liverpool or Glasgow or Atlanta, right? There are differences there, even though they're native English speakers. So that's something that I always need to remind people, even though, again, it should be obvious in our own language that we have these varieties, and that's the wealth of language, and that's what makes it so interesting. And as you said, if you're trying to pick up what the person is talking about and concentrating a bit more. That means that they're not background noise. They're not something that we hear every day in the street and in our local community, and that becomes kind of irrelevant to us. So this is something that sparks a bit of interest.
Yeah.
And I think the possibility to engage with so many different people is the exciting part. You said, when you speak to people who are excited about language, this is what you hear. I think a lot of people are, maybe they won't call themselves language lovers, but even if they just like to hear different people, I mean, maybe that puts them in that category of curious and wanting to engage with difference. Because if we only talk to people that we know and that we are very similar to, then that wouldn't be very interesting, would it?
Yeah. And I think, sorry,
mhm.
go on. No, go on.
When it comes to the podcast, I just wanted to say, that motivates us as well to hear different people express themselves in different ways, to learn from that as well, because there's always some aha moment. Like I had a live session before ours, and we were talking about presenting, and our guest said that some people even script mistakes, like they like to put in an intentional mistake into their presentation, because this is what makes them relatable. And this is what makes the audience think they're a bit smarter as well, because you want your audience to discover things. You want them to go, okay, this expert that I really agree with, they don't know how to use the present perfect. And I struggled with that as well. So, if they can say something like that, then maybe I can make that mistake, and, no one's gonna crucify me. Plus, I have this extra knowledge. Look at me, right? So immediately they're more engaged and more willing to participate.
Oh, wow. That's actually a very smart move because I think it brings, oftentimes, I think one of the reasons these lives work so well is because there's no necessarily buying or selling. It's just about human to human and having a conversation. And I think bringing down any barriers between people is such a smart thing to do in business, in anything, because when you have more of a collaboration, it's this great thing. And I think one of the best ways to do that is just by being human, and humans do make mistakes, and that's a very human act, but to actually force it into a presentation, I've never heard that before, but it makes perfect sense, right? And I think that's, and like you say, are you feeling, oh yeah, I spotted this mistake, and yeah, you feel involved, engaged in that. That's quite a smart move. I've never heard that before. I'm now thinking where I can bring that into stuff, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen even more now with the surge of AI, because obviously
Mm,
mistakes signal even more now that you're human, that you're
yeah,
not a machine, that you're not just copy pasting things.
yeah. I am. I so I've said to you before, these live conversations seem to have taken off. I went from 2 a week to 3 a week, and I was just doing it for myself, my own curiosity. And at some point, I started to get feedback of, okay, I really enjoyed it from the guests, from other people, people paying attention, and I couldn't understand not why it was. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I believe that people are looking for genuine conversations, and that's not meant that everything that I do is for everybody. I absolutely do not want that. It's a good filter, if people don't like the way that I sound or don't like the topics that I talk about, that's okay. I'm really okay with that. But if you do, then great. And I think in that world, that sea of AI, that whole trust kind of has gone away, and everyone's trying to sell everyone. Everyone's buy my course, do this, do this, do this. Whereas what I'm doing is not any of that. It's not, yeah, like I need to find a way to monetize what I'm doing or whatever that is. But people show up because they realize that I'm human. Sometimes I'll get indigestion, or I try not to burp on the live, but it's people see that you're human, and we have this bombardment. And I was talking to someone the other day about it. I see a lot of adverts. I watch YouTube and see you get these adverts, and then these adverts are like there's one at the moment I'm getting a lot of. I don't know why it's targeting me. It's about learning Tai Chi, and there's a guy who's like goes, yeah, I'm 60. Walking 20 minutes a day won't make your body amazing. And this guy's absolutely ripped. Like he's got like a 25-year-old's body. It's amazing, and he's on stage, and you're like, oh, okay. And then, but the way that AI is done, it does this weird, it's trying to put the echo of like you're talking to a big conference room, but you can spot it. And like, at first I didn't, but then the more you come up, you go, the same people are creating these things. So we have this world of fake trying to sell, etc. And I think one of the guys that I had on one of my earlier lives, he's a young guy, and he said it's not business to business, it's human to human. And I think that will win out, especially over the longer term, because of all this fake AI trying to sell, just volume business, etc. And I think, I know you can teach AI to get things wrong, etc. But I don't think you would even do the things of how I would show up, or how my brain's working, or how I change from this subject to go over here. Maybe I'm wrong, but for today, I think that's something that people really value, because they know there's no script, there's an idea of a concept, we've got a title, we're going to talk about these things, but there's no gotcha sensationalizing anything. It's just a genuine conversation. And I feel that people are more tuning in because of that. And those imperfections that I show up, I don't sit here and say I'm brilliant at doing what I do. I'm good at it, but I'm going to get a ton of things wrong, and I'm okay with that. And I think if more people take that perfectionist side away, and they feel that they could be visible on podcasts and doing these things, that is actually a benefit. It's just you've got to get over that perfectionist side and just be human and show up as much as you can as yourself as possible. Does any of that make sense? All of that? None of that?
Absolutely. The final consequence of perfectionism is not doing anything, because if you stretch it, at the end of the day, perfection is in the possibility, in the idea in your head. So people who have really severe anxiety will not do anything. They will maybe dream of a world where they dare, but they will not make that first step, because you have to make the mistakes. You have to be good to be excellent, and you have to be bad to get to good. That's how things work. We can't skip any steps. We can pretend through these AI tools and such, but the truth does come out. And you can be in quite a big world of trouble if you try to pretend that you haven't gone through all of this, that you kind of just woke up perfect one morning. So this is where trust gets lost, and it's much harder to rebuild trust than it is to build it gradually.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is. And there's this saying, fake it until you make it. Pretend to be confident and you will be confident. I don't actually necessarily believe in that, and I would not suggest pretend that you know English. I don't know. Did you ever watch the series Friends? Did you ever watch that? There was an episode where Joey says that he speaks French, and he said, I don't know what language he just mumbles something. And it was, I think when it, excuse me, when it comes to things like that, you can't fake talking English, etc. So
you can pretend to be a bit less nervous than you are. We all do that to a certain degree, but again, don't overdo it, because then you stop being relatable. Showing a bit of weakness and vulnerability is a way to connect with people, and that's something to remember and get out of our head, and realize that everybody is as scared as we are, and if they're not, that might be a cause for concern sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. That's a red flag for something. So Yeah, I get it. Excuse me. So I've got another comment that came up. So it's from an Arson. Do you know Arson? So,
No.
okay. So, a question. So, what do you think are the prospects of English in the emerging era of neurochips and communicating through brain impulses? So, I'm going to throw that to you because I feel heavily out of my depth with that question. Does that make even sense to you? Because I don't know what I can say.
This is still science fiction, I'd say. Some people are trying to sell this idea that we are on a good path towards something like this. I don't know if you read the Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. There's to put a little fish in your ear, and then this need to learn languages disappears, and we can all communicate perfectly. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think we already have decent translation devices and tools that we can use for different situations, and I'm glad they're here because it can save lives in situations where you feel lost. That's one thing, and it can help you communicate in other situations. If you don't need to speak a language on a daily basis or frequently, then from time to time to use a tool is very useful. But I don't think we're gonna lose this motivation to learn other languages, because it's not just about getting things done, it's also about connecting. And if you have a mediator, if you have the Google Translate or whatever, that does create a bit of a barrier. It makes it harder. You will never get to a point where you can translate humor or sarcasm or poetry, if you haven't gone through this process of learning the language. So I think just word by word translation is never going to be enough, but it might make it easier to skip some learning in the future for sure. That might happen. I'm not
Yeah,
worried about it. I would be sad if people lost the wish to learn languages just for self-development. That would be a sad prospect for me.
yeah, and I think like you're saying, if you're just looking at your device to translate something, yes, there's a use for it, and that's great. I think if that stuff also makes things easier and makes things easier to learn, I think that's such a great thing. But just translating words is a little bit soulless. I think learning about other people's cultures and ways and being, that's, for me at least, is very enticing. And I think we seem to live in a world where we want to hack every single thing that we do to get overnight success, and I don't I don't think there's a lot of joy in that. I'm not saying that everyone should struggle for over every single thing, but if you just get everything immediately, there's no, I wouldn't say reward. It just feels empty. And I think, yeah, I can understand, technology, etc. But there is a joy in getting things wrong. And again, you talked about it earlier on. In the school system, it's all like pass, fail, pass, fail. And I think my best learnings, I've gone faster by things not working out as I planned it. And if you're just trying to skip that step, I think you're really missing some human needs, some human I don't know what it is, emotion connection with yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. You skip this part where we're making mistakes and you're aware of the mistakes as well, because if we all just translate one thing into another, then we lose that nuance and the ability to even recognize when there's a difference that should be interesting, if nothing else. I think there's an analogy here to be made with drinking that we mentioned, because you can't rely on alcohol to feel confident in a
Yeah,
conversation. Any device can break, any tool that you have can suddenly go missing, and what then? What do you do in this
yeah,
situation? Where do you build that flexibility? So there's that element as well. And as you said, we're not algorithms. We don't function on this level where 2 + 2 is 4 and that's enough. We like to explore that 2 + 2 is 3. How can we get there? You know, how is this possible? We're curious creatures. Context is very, very important. And if that gets lost, then there is no joy, as you said. It's even more enjoyable, I would say, to go through something very embarrassing or difficult, like getting lost somewhere and trying to find your way, because you end up with a story of you triumphing over a very difficult situation, right? And if it's just, you know, something that is done very quickly and easily, there is no story to tell. And we are creatures of stories, and I think that's also something to remember and to cherish.
Yeah, I love it. That's amazing. So, Arsen, I hope that gives you a good answer. Yeah, thank you very much. So, I also think that's an amazing place to sort of end today. We're at an hour 10, so I appreciate, you know, I've taken your time, but it's been amazing. I think it's such a great subject to talk about. I think it's lovely to get your perspective on things as well. It gives me a slight interest in going back to learning the language, because it's just and it just, I think it just brings down some of that pressure and just the enjoyability of doing something and striving and something that's hard. And I think, like you just said, you know, we want to strive for things that's a human nature, and you make it sound very enjoyable. So I think, you know, hopefully people watching, you know, that do want to learn English or to improve their English, you know, sort of reach out to you, because like you said, it does open up the world of possibilities, you know, not just for business, but for many aspects, you know, traveling, enjoyment, experiences, and a whole load more. So, but for today, amazing. Thank you very much for your time, Edita. Where should people find you? Is it, you have a website, or I mean, we got connected via LinkedIn. Where should people come and find you if they want to know more about you?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to Dinka and Arsen for their comments and for spending some time with us. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I do have a website, but I think it's easiest to come and ask a few questions, come into my DMs. I'm always there, and I'm open to conversations.
Amazing. So I always repost these, and I just mention you. You're very easy to find. Your name for me was, you know, quite unique enough, so there wasn't any other options available. So yeah, I'll repost that and put the link so people can find you easier. But for today, thank you so much. Real pleasure, and I appreciate you bounced from your own live to join mine. So thank you so much. Yeah, it was great, and yeah, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.